From fitness routines to mental resilience, navigating personal goals to tackling burnout, we could all use a little help being human. And that is what the Life Kit podcast from NPR is here to do. As I'm sure you've noticed, life does not come with a manual, but you still have to make choices every day, some big, some small, and these shape the direction of your life. Well, Life Kit delivers strategies to help you make meaningful, sustainable change. I personally am still in summer mode over here, and lately Life Kit has been really delivering with advice on how to improve your grilling or make a salad for your next picnic, how to beat the heat on a humid day. Ice towels, people, ice towels, they really make a huge difference. But of course, even when you are in summer mode, life still presents much thornier issues, and Life Kit has recently done episodes on preparing your home for possible flooding, staying out of credit card debt, making hard decisions together with your spouse. I promise, if you go to the Life Kit feed and take a scroll through the topics, you will find something that will help with a dilemma in your life. So go ahead and check it out. Listen now to the Life Kit podcast from NPR. Hey there, Jody here from This Day headquarters. We are taking our usual late summer break, so for the next couple weeks we are bringing you some favorites from the archives. Maybe you've heard them before, maybe you haven't. Either way, we think these are worth spending some time with, and thanks to everyone who subscribes to our newsletter who helped vote on which episodes to rerun. This is a gentle reminder to subscribe to the newsletter. Also spread the word about the show to someone, leave a review, get in touch with an idea for an episode at thisdaypod.com, and most importantly, enjoy the last few weeks of summer. All right, here we go. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, August 1st, 1996, a judge ruled that a man by the name of Bernie Goetz still owed one of his victims $43 million in damages, despite the fact that Goetz at this point was completely bankrupt. Why did this man owe someone millions in damages? Why was he bankrupt? Well, many of you will know that name, Bernie Goetz, and the incident some 12 years earlier that set all of this off. That incident was on the New York City subway where Goetz shot 4 young black men on a train in Manhattan after they allegedly tried to rob him. Goetz was almost immediately branded as the subway vigilante, the incident becoming a huge flashpoint, a very racialized flashpoint in an era of high crime and even higher fear in New York City. But not many people may know that much beyond that. They may know the name Bernie Goetz, they know the idea of the subway vigilante. A lot of people formed their opinions just on knowing that amount of information. And certainly people may not know about the legal fallout that lasted for well over a decade after this incident. Luckily, though, there is a new series from Leon Neyfakh all about this incident and its aftermath and the context. Leon, as you may know, is the creator of Slow Burn, and now his historical audio and TV series is Fiasco, which he has done many seasons on and has often come on this show to talk about. Leon, what were some of the other seasons? You did the AIDS crisis, which was incredible.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, AIDS was the most recent one. Before that, we did the Benghazi attack and the political scandal that followed. And then before that, we did the Boston busing crisis. We did Iran-Contra, and we started off the series with a season on the 2000 election and the Bush v. Gore Supreme Court decision.
So you don't touch on controversies.
The series is called Fiasco, Kellie.
That's right. When we started the show, we hit on the name Fiasco, and we were very excited about it. It felt perfect. And then we sat down to write the first emails inviting people to come be interviewed for our first season. And we realized, oh no, we're going to have to tell these people that we want to talk to them about this key event in their life that we're calling a fiasco. And it kind of spooked us for a second, but luckily we've been able to find events that everyone on all sides can agree was a fiasco.
Right, and of course, your charge, and you do it so well. I've listened to all those series you just mentioned. Is provide context and a real understanding in the moment of how these stories played out. So, bravo, congratulations on this new series. I guess formally, Leon, welcome back to the show. Hello, nice to see you.
Thank you.
And here, as always, Nicole Hammer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
So, Leon, let's go, I guess, to the 1984, the incident. I want to specifically ask about kind of fear and crime in New York City, but specifically on the subway. It's where this incident played out. But you do such a good job in that first episode of the new season, which I've gotten a chance to listen to, of kind of painting a picture of how the subway itself, what was it the Time magazine referred to getting on the New York City subway as descending into hell or something like that?
Sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah.
People were very scared to ride the subway in New York City in the 80s. New York as a whole was sort of in the midst of a crime wave. Just to give people a sense, there were about 5 times more major felonies being reported in the early 80s in New York as compared to today. So major felonies includes murder, robbery, assault, rape. It really felt like, going outside at night was a risk. And obviously that has changed a lot. The crime wave that began, you could say starting in the mid-'60s, pretty much ended, during the 90s. Giuliani obviously gets a lot of credit for fixing the crime problem in New York, but it's kind of hard to imagine for people who, like me, moved to New York. I moved to New York in 2007, and it felt like the safest place I could be. But back in the 80s, there was really a sense that the city was in chaos, that there were people stealing cars and robbing people in the street at gunpoint all the time. And I think that was the context in which the subway became sort of the tip of the spear, I guess, if that's the right metaphor. And I think that is in part because the subway is underground, right? It's dark and it's hot in the summer.
Yep.
And also the graffiti that covered the subway cars, I think, came to represent the disorder and the lack of authority that the, NYPD had over what was going on in the city. People saw the graffiti everywhere and they thought, okay, no one's minding the store. If people can get away with this, that means there are just no rules anymore. And so people were taking the subway a lot, and there were about 1 billion subway rides per year in New York City at the time. And you would hear, about people getting their bags snatched. You would get people who specialized in robbing drunk people who were riding the subway at night, where they would, as one person told us, they would call them lush workers, and they would cut people's pants to steal their wallets from their pockets. So it just felt, as that Time magazine phrase that you referenced indicates, it felt like you were entering this dark, scary place where no one was there to protect you.
It was interesting. I moved to New York City just before you, Leon, so in 2003, and my dad had grown up in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And so his view of New York City was very much that view, fear city, that this was a place where you needed to keep, mugging money on you so you could give it over to the muggers so they would leave you alone and that you wouldn't be harmed. And he was terrified of the city. But for me, as a young person who hadn't gone through that experience, it just seemed exciting. As you mentioned, it seemed very safe. It was in many ways kind of over-policed in the aftermath of 9/11. And so it's hard to even imagine the New York City of the 1970s and 80s. We moved to a New York City where graffiti was seen as a kind of art as opposed to a sign of disorder.
Totally, yeah. I think a lot of people who are, roughly our age have that experience of their parents being like, are you sure you want to move to New York? Don't you know that it's really dangerous? And I think a lot of that is sometimes based on personal experience, but it's also based on media, right? There was an entire subgenre of movies where New York City, was almost a character in its own right, and it was a place where the sewers were, steaming at night, and a place where people with trench coats were hiding around every corner waiting to steal your money. Obviously, Taxi Driver is one canonical entry in that subgenre, and Death Wish is another one. Death Wish became very relevant in the wake of the Goetz shooting because in Death Wish you have a character who goes around taking revenge, basically, on the city's hoodlums.
Do we want to go to that incident itself then? We're, as I mentioned, we're on the subway. It's hot. It's 1984. Oh, no, this happens in December of 84, right? Yeah.
It's cold.
So it's December of
Very
84.
A few days before Christmas.
Yeah. And obviously a big part of this story is no one really knows exactly what went down. There aren't a million cell phones out at a given moment, right? It's all according to eyewitnesses and so forth. But as best you can ascertain, or even maybe just characterize it, kind of how the story got out at the time, what went down with Bernie Goetz and these 4 men who he claimed were assaulting him.
Yeah, well, so what happened was these 4 young men, they were all either 18 or 19, had gotten on the subway in the Bronx where they lived, and they were traveling downtown with the intention of breaking into arcades. This was like a pretty popular hustle at the time. People would take screwdrivers and shove them into pinball machines and arcade games and try to get all the change out. It seems like that's what they were out to get up to that day. At one point, a man later to be identified as Bernie Goetz got on the subway and sat down, and one of the 4 teenagers came up to him and either asked him for $5 or asked him for money. There's some disagreement about exactly what was said, but Goetz, who had previously been the victim of an attempted robbery on the subway, seemed to interpret their approach as a direct threat and jumped out of his seat and pulled out a gun that he had been carrying with him illegally and shot all 4 of them at close range. Amazingly, all 4 survived. They were gravely injured, but they did survive. And Goetz initially lingered in the car as everyone kind of panicked. The conductor pulled the emergency brake. The train was pulling in to a station when it happened, and a bunch of people were able to get out. But Goetz stuck around until a conductor came in and sort of asked what had happened, and he said something along the lines of, "They tried to rip me off." What's interesting is that the conductor, initially assumed that this white man with a gun was some kind of law enforcement official. And let him walk right off the train and jump into the subway tunnel, where he disappeared for over a week and did not surface again until he turned himself in New Hampshire, by which point, every newspaper in the city and around the country had reported on this mysterious subway vigilante who had stood up to New York's criminals and had taken matters into his own hands.
There's something about that backstory that becomes really important. The fact that he had been mugged before, he had been injured in a mugging, and that afterwards he applies for a permit to carry a weapon, and he gets turned down. He goes out and he gets the weapon anyway, so already he's operating kind of outside of permissibility, outside of the law. And you can imagine somebody who has been through that experience having a kind of PTSD reaction. And yet what you see is what also feels like a very methodical shooting of each of these teenagers. And I'm sure we'll go into some of those details later, but it's very easy to tell 2 different stories about what happens, and it's so interesting that the way that the press largely greets this is celebratory, right?
Yeah, and it wasn't just the press, right? It was like initially no one knew anything about who this guy was. There was a police sketch that ran on the cover of the Post. People kind of knew what he looked like, that he had glasses, but basically people filled in the blanks however they wanted to. And you were hearing the phrase subway vigilante before anyone knew Goetz's name. Yeah. And people were very, very excited for him to have done this because they felt like here was someone who finally stood up to this crime problem that New York's law enforcement authorities couldn't solve. There was a tip line that went up courtesy of the NYPD where they hoped to collect information about who this guy might have been and where he might be hiding. And instead of tips, they got they got messages from people basically praising him, and that was the overwhelming reaction from at least the most vocal people who responded.
I mean, this is not completely atypical. I feel like you've had other major incidences. I think about like the Central Park 5 or something like that, and how there's no sympathy or empathy, or like no one takes a pause to think about, well, 4 shots to each person, that feels excessive. You know, he could have just taken out his gun and sort of threatened, but the fact that there are 4 people that get shot after this, and that there's not a lot of empathy, I think is also a sign of the times.
Mm-hmm. Were there any voices of that, Leon, at the time?
Yeah, I mean, there certainly were people who eventually, stood up and said this wave of support for the subway vigilante is ugly and wrong and racist. Initially, Ed Koch, the mayor at the time, sort of said that, there was no place for vigilantism in New York City. Eventually, he changed his tune and, basically supported the decision by the initial grand jury. Once Goetz was captured, he went up before a grand jury and was not indicted by the grand jury. And Koch basically said, "Well, look, the grand jury has spoken; they've heard the evidence." Al Sharpton became a very outspoken voice on this. And in fact, I think the Goetz incident really raised his profile. Yeah. Jimmy Breslin, journalist, was very vocal about how this was wrong. One interesting thing, well, 2 actually, I wanted to mention. You said 4 shots. In fact, it seems there were 5 shots because, as Goetz himself, as he later told the authorities, stood over one of the victims, Daryl Cabey, who he observed was doing all right, in his words, and needed another shot, and so he shot him again.
God.
Yeah. He said, "You don't look so bad. Here's another," and shot him at point blank range, which, by all accounts, caused Daryl Cabey's spine to be severed and paralyzed him, and left him brain damaged. Cabey was by far the most injured of the 4. Mm-hmm. The other thing, real quick, I wanted to mention was that the screwdrivers. Remember, I mentioned that these guys were trying to use screwdrivers to break into arcade machines. Those screwdrivers were found on them. They were in their pockets, and the tabloids at the time reported it as them having used the screwdrivers to menace Goetz. And in fact, they said that the screwdrivers were sharpened. They were deliberately turned into weapons. In fact, as witnesses on the subway car, confirmed, the boys had not taken out these screwdrivers. They were in their pockets. And so the image that a lot of people had based on the first, wave of reporting was that these guys had come up to Goetz with these sharpened screwdrivers and, threatened his life. In fact, they had just asked him for money. And perhaps it's a different story if you think someone is facing 4 armed assailants. Mm-hmm. Maybe if you have a gun in your pocket, then you do take it out. But the real story, as Jimmy Breslin emphasized in a lot of his commentary on this, those screwdrivers are not relevant for how we assess Goetz's decision making, because he didn't know they were there because they were in their pockets.
Communication is critical to your success in your personal and professional life. I'm Matt Abrahams, and I teach strategic communication at Stanford Graduate School of Business, and I host Think Fast, Talk Smart, the podcast. I sit down with experts to discuss actionable advice that you can immediately apply to your life. We cover topics like managing communication anxiety, speaking better in the moment, maximizing your influence, and how to negotiate to get what you want and need. Listen wherever you get your podcasts to level up your communication.
As summer winds down, I'm all about refreshing my wardrobe with staple pieces for the season ahead. And Quince nails it with luxe essentials that feel effortless and look polished, perfect for layering and mixing. I recently went and picked out a couple pairs of slacks, a light jacket, because that crisp fall air will be here before we know it. And then I was looking around the Quince website and I noticed a section I hadn't seen before. Kids. I'm not sure if this applies to you, but oh my gosh, my kid is going back to school soon. And not only that, they grew over the summer. That always kind of sneaks up on me. Well, luckily, Quince has stylish and affordable kids' clothes, so I quickly snagged a linen overshirt, a pair of kids' jeans, and even some new running pants. They also have kids' backpacks, by the way, just a tip. So, whether for you or whoever, elevate your fall wardrobe essentials with Quince. Go to quince.com/thisday for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/thisday to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/thisday. On that point, the 5th shot, offers such a interesting notion of vigilantism, I think in a kind of traditional sense of like, I'm taking the law into my own hands and I'm going to be assertive and aggressive. But, I'm curious, and by the way, that's the name of your series, Vigilante. I mean, I'm sure you've thought a lot about that word. People picked it up mostly, I think, to laud Goetz. But, it does imply, at least my understanding of it, that someone is going out there actively looking to clean up the streets or take law into their own hands. Whereas, this incident, I think, is largely Goetz responding to something and, reacting in a skewed way? Or is there an indication that he was out there kind of picking a fight or looking for some trouble?
Yeah, I mean, that was, I think, for us, a central question. Like, what can we know about his state of mind? Was he out there hunting, essentially, like just waiting for someone to mess with him? Because he did have this experience, about 3 years earlier where he was an electronics repairman is not quite the right word. The literal description of his job was he tested testing equipment, which I think is quite funny. He was
fun to track many times in your series.
Yes, exactly. But he was walking from his favorite electronics shop on Canal Street, and he walked into the subway on Canal Street and was approached by 3 people in that case who asked him for his money, and he ran back to the electronics shop. He was like slammed against the door. Ultimately, he came away from that experience really embittered and angry that the assailants had gotten away with it in his telling, but also that he had been kept at the police station longer than any of them had because they treated him as if he was the problem and not them. And he was really angry. He went to Florida where he had family and bought guns. He made a point of telling the authorities that not only did he buy one gun for his own self-protection, he bought more guns so that he could sell to other people in New York at cost, he specified, because he felt that everyone deserved this level of self-defense in a city that the authorities had forsaken, essentially. And so was he out there hunting? Like, we can't really know. I think in a general sense, this was someone primed to, quote unquote, take action.
Yeah.
And somebody who had already adopted the vigilante mindset of, in this situation, I have the authority to be judge, jury, and executioner. Like, the law has abandoned me. I get to adopt that role. That's my right now. And so when he was confronted with that situation, when he encountered that situation, he acted as a vigilante because he'd already decided that was his right.
Yeah, and he was completely unrepentant. One of the most amazing resources for us as we made this series was a 2-hour interview he gave in New Hampshire after he turned himself in which he essentially bragged about how methodical he had been and how almost militaristic he had been in his, in the tactics he employed in that moment. He talked about how he was completely in control. He talked about how he wished he could have done worse to these guys. He said, I wanted to gouge their eyes out. If I could have, I would have. I wish I'd killed them, basically, is what he said. Which makes it all the more kind of incredible that when he did ultimately get indicted and went to trial, he was found not guilty of attempted murder.
And I'll just say another detail that was kind of stunning to me. And look, I guess we shouldn't judge the kids on the basis of what their actions were before this moment. Maybe we shouldn't judge Goetz on his actions in the immediate aftermath. But the fact that he doesn't he run off the train? He burns the jacket he was wearing. He absconds to New Hampshire. I mean, he acts in a way that's criminal. Well, Kellie. I will say at the very least, tactical and concerted, like he is in this kind of war mindset.
Totally. Yeah.
But that stuff was pretty stunning to me, and I will say that I don't think I ever knew that before digging into this story through your series. Okay, so I suppose we did hook this to some of the legal fallout. Very quickly, I know you get into a lot of this, but you mentioned the initial grand jury, but why is it that 12 years later this is still going on? There's judges still awarding damages to the victims. How long is the tail here?
It's longer than I realized when we started. That's for sure. So just to give you the sort of nuts and bolts, he was initially the first grand jury did not indict, and then there was some public outcry, particularly when footage from that crazy interview he gave to the police came out, and people started to see him a little bit differently. That sort of gave some momentum, seemingly, to a second presentation to a second grand jury by the DA, and in that case, at that stage, he was indicted for attempted murder. he went to trial, and he was convicted of illegal gun possession by the jury. And we spoke to 2 members of the jury who have clued us into kind of how they made their decision, but they did not convict him of attempted murder. And he ended up serving about 9 months in jail before getting out. However, there was a concurrent civil case brought by the family of Daryl Cabey. Daryl Cabey was one of the 4 boys who was most gravely injured. And Daryl Cabey's mother came to a law firm in New York and basically asked for help with, she didn't even really know what, according to to Ron Kuby, one of the lawyers who was on the case and we spoke to. He said she just wanted to set the record straight. She didn't understand how her son, who by all accounts was not like some kind of hardcore career criminal, like maybe got into trouble and all that, but wasn't the person that the tabloids and the general public seemed to think he was. She wanted help correcting the record, and so the civil case that she pressed was sort of her vehicle to do that. And that civil case dragged on and on and on into the mid-1990s, and it wasn't until early 1996 that a jury found in her favor, in the Cabey's family's favor, and awarded his family $43 million that Goetz was theoretically supposed to pay.
Yeah, but he's bankrupt. He has no money, so the family's really not going to get anything.
Yeah, they never got anything. He pled poverty, essentially. There's an amazing New York Times story that talks about his lawyer's argument for why he couldn't afford to pay this money. The lawyer listed all of his assets, which included $320 worth of clothing, a pet chinchilla, and a pet guinea pig, which the lawyer valued at $130, and $500 in cash. That was all, set against a ledger of liabilities that the lawyer said he was carrying with him, including $16 million in unpaid lawyer bills. And so in the
million.
That's right. Yeah, which is weird because a lot of the legal help he got was free. So I can't tell you how they got those numbers, but in the end, the Cabey family did not get a penny from him. And, a lot of people, I think, thought they did. And so, the family moved away from New York City after this incident. We talked to Daryl's sister, Raven, and Raven told us about how, people assumed they were wealthy because of this, and it just wasn't true at all.
What I think is so important about this larger story, about the court cases and the civil case and this kind of vigilante idea, is that the series really does sound like a kind of meditation on the idea of justice and what justice looks like and what kind of justice is available and what justice gets meted out and who has access to justice. It feels like, whether it's through criminal trials or civil trials or taking a gun out on the subway, like that idea of clashing ideas of justice are centering on this one incident in 1984.
Yeah, and I think the money, even if they had gotten some of it, obviously wouldn't have solved anything. No. The damage was done. Their lives were completely derailed. All 4 of them. Not even Daryl Cabey was the one who was most seriously hurt, but one of the other boys, he ended up dying of a drug overdose on the anniversary of the shooting. I think in 2011, and people, speculated that it was a suicide. This was a life-ruining incident, and I don't know how you get justice for that.
I want to get some bit larger thoughts from Niki and Kellie, but one final thing, just Leon, on the story. This is a big moment, but did it actually change anything, either in the kind of conversation we had about New York City's streets and subways, or in the larger sense of what justice means, as Niki was just referring to? Can you see this as an inflection point in any way?
Yeah, there's, sometimes we've made seasons of fiasco where we sort of have to strain to find the resonance with the present. And in this case, it was just so many different strains of it that are clearly echoing with the current moment. putting aside just the very obvious fact that we've had cases of so-called vigilantes taking the law into their own hands and then getting celebrated for it, there were repercussions in terms of self-defense law. New York's highest court ended up sort of clarifying the state's self-defense law as a result of this case. But also, it really helped the gun rights movement, ironically. We talked to a guy whose job was spokesperson for the NRA at the time, and he told us all about how the Goetz case was incredibly useful to them in sort of driving home this idea that guns weren't just something that people in rural communities needed to hunt, but rather something that people in cities needed to defend themselves with. And so, in terms of like what it actually changed, I think it probably just aggravated a lot of pre-existing impulses that people already had, and this story kind of just proved everyone right in their own minds on all sides of the issue.
Man.
Yeah. And certainly, as you move into the 90s, through the 80s into the 90s, you get Giuliani and the rise of broken windows and all of that, which I think you can obviously trace back to this larger
era,
context that we laid out. So final thought. I mean, I'm just, Niki and Kellie, both of you think a lot about extrajudicial violence and have, studied that and tried to put it in context in your respective eras. I'm just curious if you have kind of larger thoughts, whether you see this resonance through the various eras that you study.
I mean, for me, it's not what counts as justice, but what counts as crime. Because I feel like it's often the victims that get criminalized. And then the ones that enact so-called justice are the ones that get a slap on the wrist or no prison time or no indictments. I mean, a lot of this reminds me of like George Zimmerman, of Kyle Rittenhouse. Like, there's so many contemporary versions of this. But of course, if you go back into the past, I mean, if you think about the lynch mob, there's no accountability for the lynch mob. It was just as Niki said, just judge, jury, and executioner, based off of rumors, not even actual violence. And so, I think the through line there is how we define criminality.
One of the lines in the show is something about how this was an era-defining crime that many people didn't recognize as a crime at all.
And in the era that I look at, especially in the 70s through 90s, one of the things that has become very clear to me is that we talk about vigilantism as a kind of lawlessness or operating outside the law. But vigilantism is part of law and order politics. It is part of who gets to decide, as Kellie was saying, who's a criminal and who's an enforcer, who has the right to decide when a law has been broken and what the punishment will be. And I think it's no coincidence that it is in eras where there's a real focus on this idea of law and order that there's also a real embrace and celebration of vigilantism, because they're both working to uphold the same political and social order. They're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the series is called Fiasco, and this season is called Vigilante. And like all the seasons of Fiasco, provides this great context. It is also, I will say, full of like all these little name checks and these little moments, and it's like, oh, that person's in this story. Like even just you mentioned Ron Kuby, Leon, and like he's a guy who, when I first moved to New York, co-hosted a radio show with Curtis Sliwa, who was the head of the Guardian Angels, who are clearly part of this story as well. And I think this Bernie Goetz story is where the two of them probably found each other. So anyway, so it is full of all these little threads and strands and names and so forth, like all the great work you do. So go check it out. And Leon Neyfakh, thanks as always. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
If people were on the subway system then, what if the whole system geared up and went to work against this lawlessness, this atrocity? What if someone else in that subway system were butchered? And the guys, you think the guys would have been caught? You think it would have been any big thing? It would have been one more statistic, and don't nod your head yes, because you know better. And if you don't know better, you just don't know New York.
Radiotopia.